All right, let's continue with this discussion now and welcome Wandile Sihlobo, who is the Chief Economist of the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, as we continue to look at the direct impact of the U.S. tariffs here on South African farmers as well as the agricultural sector. Wandile, it's great to have you with us on the show today. Welcome. So in the wake of the U.S. tariffs, let's lay bare the direct implications on our agricultural sector. Many feel that this move should have been mitigated by South Africa, as it was becoming quite obvious that they would be removed from AGOA, and that we underscored the urgent need to actually diversify the country's agricultural exports in due time.
I think South Africa has managed to a certain extent to have well-diversified agricultural exports. If you look at the statistics, for example, South Africa exports a year around $13.7 billion of agricultural products. The amount that goes to the U.S. market is about 4%. We have 96% of our products going to a whole range of other countries, 40% or so to the African continent, 19% to the EU, the Middle East, and the others also taking a significant share of that. The challenge, though, with that 4% in the US is that it is concentrated in a few industries. Because if you ask then in value terms, that is just under $500 million. And of course, there you have citrus, you have wine, you have nuts, and grapes being amongst those products. So the impact will be felt quite significantly by those particular industries. Suffice to say then that we are here now. The key question is about how do we manage this relationship with the US and in the medium term continue with that export diversification.
And we're going to get into that, Wandile, because we understand the country was just celebrating the new record of our agricultural exports, having reached a whopping $13.7 billion the previous year, with our exports to the United States accounting to about 4%. So how do we now, back to that question that you provided as your answer, how do we now, in the immediate term, fix this quagmire in time so as not to see even worse impact on agricultural businesses?
At the moment, there is a lot of work that is underway. Our colleagues at the DTIC, those that are at DECO and the others, we know that they are hands-on on trying to figure out what the immediate term solution could be, both for industries like agriculture and the others. And I think the statements that were released, the joint statement by the minister from the DTIC, as well as the minister at DECO, Mr. Ronald Lamola, on last week was one of those that was signaling to that, which is the idea then that the only thing that I think can help us as the agricultural sector in South Africa is if, one, we either get a tariff-free quota for the volume of fruit that we could send to the US, or we get the equal tariff level like our competitors, which is the likes of Chile, Australia, and Brazil within that US market. But if we are stuck with the higher tariffs of around about 31%, of course, then that puts us in a very uncompetitive position, and it will be difficult for South Africa. The most difficult thing for South Africa is also the fact that within the next 3 weeks or so, the fruit, particularly citrus, will be getting ready and being packed. And much of that from the Western Cape and parts to the Eastern Cape was already scheduled to be destined for the US market, which means then that in the medium term or in the immediate term, we need to figure out a solution about what do we do about that. The issues of export diversification are more of medium to long-term approach of saying how do we do that. But I think in the near term, we really need some tariff-free quota or concession that the US can give us there, which I think these conversations then by the local authorities, trade and industry and DECO, as well as general agricultural sector and the others engaged onto this, we have to come up with a solution that resolves that.
But I mean, Wandile, any fast, easy route to address this situation? Because as we understand, trade agreements typically take up to a minimum of 5 years to actually conclude. So it becomes quite critical then for South Africa to re-engage Washington, whom is seemingly not willing to hear anything at this stage. So what can we use as leverage if we go this route then?
I mean, look, we have to look at ourselves and ask the question of what does the US want from South Africa, but also present the case of the fact that the products that we send to the US is because there is a demand for it. There's a counter-seasonality issue when it comes to agriculture, where we have particular products when they don't have it in that market. And I think those are some part and parcel of the conversation we must have. And in terms of the quota, I think if South Africa can get about 100,000 tons, either tariff-free or at 10%, we can have the breathing space. Then from there onwards, then the long-term free trade agreement conversation has to begin. What South Africa can go forward with is, of course, then asking those bit of a leeway for the near term for sensitive industries. But I think highlighting the desire that in the long term, we want a trade agreement. And I mean, this is something that the presidency issued last week in their formal statement, that they want for South Africa a free trade agreement at some point. And I think the minister at DERCO signaled that. And that's the view that in industry in South African agriculture, we also want, because with a free trade agreement, you do have a bit of a predictability. Because even before that, when we were in AGOA, we had a unilateral arrangement with the US, not necessarily a free trade agreement. There was already a desire on our part that we need to graduate out of that and get on this free trade agreement path. And I think today, as difficult the environment as it is that we are in, that's the medium to long-term approach that we will have to think of doing.
Wandile, great input. Thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Wandile Sihlobo is the Chief Economist at AgriBiz.